The frost had not yet pulled back from the grass when the truck rolled up the gravel drive and stopped in front of the small white house on Mercer Road. Decker Sloan sat behind the wheel for a moment with the engine idling, looking at the place through the windshield the way a man studies a chessboard when he already knows the outcome. The house needed paint. The porch railing was soft on one end. A clay pot by the front door held the brown remains of something that had been flowers before winter came. It was the kind of house that had been loved for a very long time by someone who no longer had the physical means to love it the way it deserved. He cut the engine and opened the door. Beside him in the cab, Decker's German shepherd, Colt, was already on his feet. Colt was not small, 78 pounds of working-line German shepherd, a deep sable coat with black overlay and saddle markings, black from his shoulders to the base of his tail, tan at his chest and legs, with a black muzzle mask that gave him a permanently serious expression. He had wide-set, dark amber eyes that caught light in a way that made people feel examined rather than observed. He wore a plain olive-drab collar with a worn brass tag. No vest, no tactical hardware. Just the dog and his attention, which was considerable. Colt pressed his nose to the passenger window and watched the house. Decker had not intended to bring him. It was supposed to be a 10-minute errand, a formality, the kind of task that took up an hour of paperwork and 30 seconds of actual human contact. He was employed by Meridian Property Solutions, a company based in a glass office building in Spokane that bought distressed residential properties in small towns and converted them to rental portfolios. His role was field acquisition. What that meant, practically, was simple. He drove to addresses, rang doorbells, and handed people an envelope. He was good at it. He had been doing it for 2 years without examining it too closely. He stepped out of the truck and Colt dropped down beside him without being told, shoulder at Decker's left knee, ears forward. The morning was cold and still. A crow called from somewhere behind the tree line. The lawn was winter gray, not yet green, with frost still white in the shadows of the fence posts. The sky was the color of old dishwater. Decker reached the porch steps. If this story lands on you the way it landed on me, I hope you'll stay with it until the end. He was 39 years old, and he looked it, though not in the way most 39-year-olds do. He was 6 feet and 2 inches of compressed stillness, broad across the back, with the kind of posture that comes not from discipline, but from years of carrying weight in places where slouching had consequences. His hair was dark brown, cropped short on the sides, longer on top with early gray threading through at the temples. His face was square, angular, weathered around the eyes, with a thin horizontal scar just below his right cheekbone from a deployment incident he had never described in any detail to anyone. His jaw was clean-shaved. His expression in repose was not unkind, but it was not warm either. It was the face of someone who had learned to keep the important things below the surface, where they were harder to reach. He had grown up less than 4 miles from where he was standing. That was not something he had thought about when his supervisor emailed him the address. He had seen the street name, and something moved in him without quite surfacing. The way a large fish turns in deep water, visible for just a second, and then gone. He had told himself it was nothing. He had told himself he had not lived in Cardwell, Washington, since he was 17 years old, and 22 years was plenty of time to make a town into a stranger. He had believed that more or less, until he turned onto Mercer Road and recognized the fence. The same white fence. The same post that leaned a little to the left at the gate. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Colt stopped beside him. Something in the dog shifted, a small tightening, ears drawing slightly forward. Colt did not growl. He simply became more alert than he had been, which with Colt was always noticeable, like a room going a degree quieter. Decker looked at the front door. The door opened before he knocked. She was 73 years old, and she moved through the doorway without hurrying, which told him she had seen the truck arrive and had made a deliberate choice not to rush. She was small, 5'2" at most, with white hair cut short and neat above her ears. Her face was lined, not heavily but honestly. The lines of a woman who had been outdoors often and laughed often, and the two had left their marks together. She wore a gray wool cardigan over a flannel shirt, dark slacks, lace-up shoes that had been resoled at least once. Her eyes were pale green and extremely clear. She did not look at the envelope in his hand. She looked at Colt. "That's a beautiful dog," she said. Her voice was steady, and her posture was straight, and there was no fear in her face. Decker had delivered enough of these envelopes to know what fear looked like. It looked like hands gripping the door frame. It looked like a quick glance at the letterhead before the eyes went blank. This woman looked at his dog the way someone looks at something they have been half expecting to see for a long time. "Thank you," Decker said. He paused. "Ma'am, my name is Decker Sloan. I'm with Meridian Property Solutions. I have a notice for a Helen Voss." "I'm Helen Voss," she said. She still had not looked at the envelope. He extended it. She took it, turned it once in her hands, and set it down on the wicker table beside the door without opening it. "Would you like to come in?" she said. "I should explain what's in that envelope," he said. "I know what's in it," she said. "I had a letter last week, and one the week before. Come in if you'd like. The coffee is already made." He should have said no. That was the policy. The policy was envelope delivered, signature confirmed if possible, departure within 5 minutes, no personal engagement with the occupant. The policy existed for reasons Decker had never questioned, because he had never planned to be in the position of questioning it. Colt walked forward. Not fast, not urgently, just forward, up the 2 porch steps to where Helen stood, and he stopped there and sat down, and he looked up at her. Helen looked down at Colt for a moment. Then she reached out and laid one hand briefly on the top of his broad, black and tan head. Colt did not flinch. He did not press forward. He simply received the touch with a patience that Decker had seen the dog extend to very few people in 2 years of working together. Something moved in Decker's chest. He did not examine it. "All right," he said. 5 minutes. The inside of the house was warm and smelled of coffee and something baking, cinnamon or maybe cardamom. The living room was modest, with furniture that had not been replaced in perhaps 20 years. Clean but worn, a braided rug, curtains that had faded evenly, photographs on every wall. Decker looked at the photographs as a reflex rather than a choice, the way a person reads signs. There were dozens of them. Family gatherings, outdoor shots, a young woman in a garden, a man on a ladder repairing a roof, a little boy on a bicycle, school portraits in their cardboard frames, and in the center of the largest wall, in a plain wooden frame, a photograph that stopped him. A woman standing in front of this house, 30 years younger, her arm around a boy of perhaps 7 or 8. The boy had dark hair and serious, dark eyes, and he was squinting slightly against the afternoon sun. Decker stood very still. The boy in the photograph was wearing a striped shirt that Decker remembered without wanting to. He remembered because his mother had bought it at the farm supply store in Spokane, and he had been embarrassed by it because none of the other boys wore shirts from the farm supply store, and he had complained, and his mother had said the shirt was fine, and he had worn it anyway. He remembered the afternoon in that photograph. He had been 7. Mrs. Voss from 2 houses down had brought a pie to his mother, and his mother had taken them both onto the porch and taken their picture with the camera his father had left behind when he left, which was the only photograph Decker had that contained his mother's face. His mother had died when he was 14. He had been placed with an aunt in Tacoma. He had never come back. He stood in the living room and looked at that photograph for a long time. "I thought so," Helen said from the kitchen doorway. "When I saw the truck, I saw your name on the first letter, but I wasn't certain. There are Sloans in 4 counties. She paused. "You have your mother's jaw." Decker said nothing. Colt had crossed to where Decker stood and pressed his shoulder lightly against Decker's leg. "Sit down," Helen said. "Please." He sat. Not because he planned to, but because the alternative was standing in front of that photograph for another minute, and he did not have the architecture for that right now. He sat in the chair nearest the window, the one with the worn armrest that faced the yard, and Colt settled beside him on the rug, his head on his paws, his dark eyes open. Helen came in with 2 mugs and set them on the table between them. She sat across from him in the chair that had the look of a permanent occupation. A reading lamp pulled close, a small stack of library books on the side table, a half-finished crossword folded into itself. "Your mother was my neighbor for 11 years, Helen said. "After she passed, I used to think about what became of you." She held her mug in both hands. "I'm glad you turned out solid." "Mrs. Voss," Decker said. He meant to say more. He did not. "Helen," she said. The envelope sat on the wicker table outside, unopened. He knew what it contained. A notice of pending acquisition under a purchase agreement that Meridian had executed with the lender holding the reverse mortgage on this property. Her husband, Gerald Voss, had died 14 months ago. The reverse mortgage had matured. The house would transfer unless a lump sum payoff was made within 60 days. Meridian had purchased the right to that payoff position from the lender for $82,000. The house, by comparable sales in the county, was worth approximately $215,000. The difference was Meridian's margin. Decker knew all of this. He had known it in the truck. He had not put it together with the white fence and the leaning post until he was already on the porch. "How long has it been since you've been back?" Helen asked. 22 years, he said. She nodded as if this confirmed something she had already calculated. "The Marines," she said. "Yes." "Your mother would have been proud." The pressure in his chest tightened in a way he did not entirely expect. He set down the coffee mug. "Helen," he said, and stopped. He started again. "The letter is a 60-day notice. That means Meridian has 60 days to complete the acquisition before they would need to seek a court order." "I know," she said. "Do you have legal representation?" She looked at him steadily. "I have an appointment next week with a woman at the county legal aid office. Her name is Sarah Dent. I've been told she handles exactly this kind of situation." "Good," Decker said. He heard himself say it and knew that something had already shifted, some internal calculation that he had not consciously made, but that was now simply complete, the way a door that has been quietly closing finally clicks shut. "That's very good." He stood. Colt rose with him. "I'll be honest with you," Decker said. "What I was sent here to do is deliver that notice and confirm you received it. I've done that. What I'm going to do now is go sit in my truck and make a phone call." Helen watched him. "This house is worth more than twice what Meridian paid for the mortgage position," he said. "That is a fact that an attorney will find useful." Helen was quiet for a moment. She looked at Colt, who was standing at Decker's knee, patient and present. "He's a very good dog," she said. "He is," Decker said. "Did you name him?" "He came with the name," Decker said. "It fit." She stood, and she was smaller standing than she had seemed sitting, fragile in a way that was visible now. The thinness of her wrists, the careful way she rose. Her eyes stayed clear and her chin stayed level, and she walked him to the door without leaning on anything. On the porch, she picked up the envelope from the wicker table and held it out to him. "I won't be needing this back," he said. "No," she said, "but I suspect you might need to have a copy of it for some purpose or other, in case questions come up later about dates." He took it. He looked at her. "Thank you for the coffee," he said. "Come back," she said. "Both of you." He walked to the truck with Colt at his heel. He got in and sat for a moment with the keys in his hand. The house sat there in the pale March light, ordinary and old and not for sale in any way that mattered. He did not make the phone call he had told Helen he would make. Not immediately. He drove 2 blocks and pulled over and sat with the engine running, his hands on the wheel, and looked at nothing in particular. 22 years. He had left this town at 17 with a duffel bag and a bus ticket, and a particular kind of grief that he had never quite named. The grief of leaving a place before you had finished becoming whoever you were going to be. He had become a Marine instead, which was its own kind of formation. 3 deployments, 12 years of service, then 2 years of work that had started as a means of staying occupied and had gradually become something he did not examine. He had told himself the job was just property, just paper, just economics. He had told himself this often enough that it had started to feel like something other than a story. Colt put his head on Decker's arm. Decker scratched behind the dog's ears without thinking about it. "Yeah," he said. "I know." He made the first call. He had her number because it was his job to know who the opposition might engage, and she had developed a reputation in 3 adjacent counties for being very thorough about reverse mortgage acquisition cases and very willing to make companies like Meridian explain themselves in public filings. She picked up on the second ring. He told her the property address. He told her Helen had an appointment the following week. He told her what Meridian had paid for the mortgage position and what the county assessor's comparable sales showed for the neighborhood. He read her the date on the notice so she could calculate the 60-day window herself. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Who is this, exactly?" "Someone who grew up on Mercer Road," he said. He made the second call to his supervisor in Spokane. He told her the notice had been delivered and confirmed. He did not mention anything else. He drove back toward the center of town, which took about 4 minutes in Cardwell, and he pulled into the gravel lot beside a place called Garland's, a diner he had eaten breakfast in exactly 3 times, all before the age of 10, and which appeared from the outside to have not changed in any meaningful way. He went in. Colt walked beside him. A sign by the door said, "Dogs welcome" on the far side, where there were 4 tables by a window that looked out on the empty parking lot and the bare trees beyond. They took the corner table. A woman in her mid-50s came over, gray-streaked dark hair pulled back, the kind of face that had laughed a great deal and was not done laughing. Her name tag said Patrice. "Coffee," she said, looking at Colt with immediate approval. "Please," Decker said. She brought it and said, "He's handsome. Is he working or retired?" "Semi-retired," Decker said. "He still consults." Patrice smiled and went back to the counter. Decker drank the coffee and looked out the window at the bare trees and the gray sky, and thought about Helen in that chair by the reading lamp, with the crossword folded in her lap, and the pile of library books and the photographs on every wall. He thought about Gerald Voss. He had no memory of the man, only a peripheral impression of a large, gentle presence on the other side of a fence, someone who grew tomatoes and fixed his own truck, which in Decker's childhood had struck him as a specific kind of competence worth admiring. He thought about the reverse mortgage. He had delivered notices on 14 such cases in 2 years. He had not thought about any of them afterward with the texture this one was acquiring. Patrice came back with a refill and said, without particular emphasis, you're not from around here, but you kind of look like you might be." "I grew up here," Decker said. "Left a long time ago." She said. "Sloan's. Over off Mercer?" "Yes. I went to school with a girl named Donna Sloan." "She was my mother," he said. Patrice put the coffee pot down on the table and looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not pity, but was its close neighbor. "She was kind," Patrice said. "I remember that specifically. She was always kind." "Yes," Decker said. "She was." He stayed for an hour. By the time he left, he had learned that Helen had been a fixture of this town for 50 years, that she had taught Sunday school at First Community for 30 of them, that her husband Gerald had built half the raised beds in the community garden behind the library, and that the general consensus at Garland's, expressed by Patrice and 2 other women who had joined the conversation without much ceremony, was that whoever was trying to take Helen's house was going to find Cardwell a more complicated town than they expected. He drove back to Mercer Road. He was not certain why. He sat in the truck outside the white fence for a while, and then he got out and walked up to the porch and knocked. Helen opened the door in the same unhurried way, as if she had been expecting him. "I've already made the call," he said. "She'll be ready for your appointment." "I heard," Helen said. "She called me 20 minutes ago." "Good." Helen looked at him for a moment, quiet and steady. "Would you like to see the rest of the photographs?" she said. He almost said no. He had a report to file and a 4-hour drive back to Spokane, and a series of professional obligations that were becoming more abstract to him by the hour. He almost said no. "Yes," he said. She let him and Colt in again, and she walked him slowly around the living room, telling him, without any particular drama or sentimentality, who was in each photograph and why. A daughter in Portland who called every Sunday. 2 grandchildren she saw at Christmas. Gerald's brother in Missoula who had driven down to help after Gerald passed and had stayed 6 weeks longer than he planned. A photograph of the garden in summer. The tomatoes enormous and red. The rows of beans. The corner plot where Gerald had grown pumpkins for the grandchildren. And then she stopped in front of the center wall. The photograph of herself and the boy in the striped shirt, squinting in the afternoon sun. "Your mother asked me to take their picture," she said. "And then she said to me, which I remember precisely, she said, 'Helen, if anything ever happens to me, will you keep an eye on him?' And I said I would, and she said, 'Thank you.' And 2 weeks later, she went into the hospital, and she didn't come back out." The room was very quiet. Colt, from somewhere near Decker's knee, made no sound. Just his steady breathing, his warm weight, present. "I tried to find you," Helen said. "After. I called the county, and they told me you'd gone to family out of the area. I didn't have a name or a number." She paused. "I've thought about that boy in this photograph for a long time." Decker looked at the photograph. The boy was squinting because the sun was at the wrong angle, and his mother had told him to look at the camera anyway. He could remember the specific warmth of that afternoon, the smell of the yard, the sound of the neighbors' wind chimes. He could not have said why he remembered the wind chimes, but he did. "I should not be the one who takes this house," he said. It came out plainly without drama, the way a fact does when it has been true for some time, and you are finally saying it out loud. Helen said nothing. She did not need to. "I'm going to contact my supervisor tonight and remove myself from this case," he said. "The 60-day clock is running. She is good. She'll know what to do with the gap between what Meridian paid and what this property is worth. There may be grounds to challenge the acquisition position directly. Is that likely? Helen asked. I don't know, he said, but it's more likely than it was this morning. She walked him to the door again. On the porch, she paused and looked at Colt, who was sitting beside Decker's leg in the cold afternoon air, his breath visible, his amber eyes calm. When Gerald passed, she said, I had a very hard 6 months. Not the practical things. I managed the practical things. The hard part was the mornings. He used to make the coffee. Just that one thing, just the coffee, but mornings were very long without it. She looked up at Decker. Then, in the fall, a stray cat started coming to the back porch. Nothing much to look at. But she showed up every morning, and she sat there while I had my coffee, and I talked to her, which sounds foolish. It doesn't, Decker said. What I'm saying, she said, is that sometimes what you need shows up in a form you weren't expecting. He drove to the motel on Route 9 outside town and checked in for the night, which he had not planned to do. He filed his report noting the notice had been delivered. He sent a separate email to his supervisor stating that due to a personal conflict of interest, he was recusing himself from the Mercer Road acquisition and requesting reassignment. His supervisor replied within the hour with a terse acknowledgement. She did not push back. She did not ask for explanation. He suspected she was already calculating the cost of pushing back against an employee who had just been handed a reason to hire a lawyer of his own. He sat in the motel room with Colt beside him on the narrow bed, and he looked at the ceiling for a while. He had 4 more acquisition cases on his schedule for the month. He thought about each of them. He thought about the property addresses and the envelopes and the formality of the 10-minute errands. He thought about what Patrice had said. She was always kind, said without preamble, and without decoration, as if it were the most important thing she could convey about another human being. He thought about the reverse mortgage. He knew how those products were sold. He knew the brochures, the friendly loan officer, the reassurance that you could stay in your home as long as you lived. He knew the mechanics of what happened when the last surviving borrower died, and he knew the machinery Meridian had built to be at the front of that line. He had known all of this. He had filed it in a part of himself he did not visit. He got his laptop out and spent the next 2 hours looking at things he had not previously looked at. The State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Unit, a class of complaints filed in the past 18 months against a category of companies that included Meridian, an advocacy organization based in Olympia that had published a report on predatory reverse mortgage acquisitions in rural communities. He found her name in that report in the acknowledgments section. He was not certain what he was going to do. He was certain that the shape of what he had been doing was no longer something he was willing to inhabit. In the morning, he went back to Garland's. Patrice was there, and without being asked, she brought coffee and a plate of eggs and set them down and said, "You're still here?" "I am," he said. She said, in the way that contained a great deal more than the word itself. He ate and watched the morning settle over the street outside. A pickup went past. A woman walked a large brown dog. The bare trees at the end of the block were beginning to show the first pale swelling of buds. March in eastern Washington, caught between the last of the cold and the first real suggestion that it would ever be otherwise. He called Sarah Dent from the parking lot. "I want to give you something," he said when she picked up. Background on how Meridian structures these acquisitions, the internal mechanics, pricing model, timing, the relationship with the lending institution. He paused. "I want to be clear that I'm not breaching any confidentiality that covers client information. This is structural knowledge about how the company operates, but it's detailed." A beat of silence. Can you document it? She said. I can write it out, he said. From memory. It would be a sworn statement if you need it. That, she said, would be useful. He spent 4 hours in the motel room writing it out. It was 14 pages, typed carefully. Everything he knew about how Meridian identified distressed reverse mortgages, how they priced the acquisitions, what the internal valuation model looked like, and how the 60-day notice process was calibrated. He did not editorialize. He described. He sent it with a note saying she could share it with the Attorney General's office if she thought it had relevance beyond the single property. She replied in less than an hour. 3 words. This is significant. He stayed in Cardwell for 5 more days. He was not sure, initially, that he was doing anything in particular. He drove around the town in the mornings with Colt in the passenger seat, and he looked at the place with the slow attention you bring to something you are trying to recover after a long absence. The hardware store was still there. Different name, same building. The library had a new wing. The high school had been repainted. The feed store on the north end of town was gone and had been replaced by a chain pharmacy that looked temporary even though it had clearly been there for years. On the second afternoon, he stopped at the community garden behind the library. The beds were empty this time of year, turned over for winter, the soil dark and loose. A hand-painted sign identified one of the beds as the Voss bed, which had been Gerald Voss's contribution to the garden program for 17 years. He stood there for a while. Colt sniffed the edges of the bed with professional interest. A man came around the corner of the shed at the back of the garden carrying a coil of drip line, 60 or so, lean and deliberate, wearing canvas work pants and a heavy flannel shirt and a battered hat that had clearly been through several winters. He stopped when he saw Decker and looked at Colt with the direct appraisal of someone who liked dogs. Nice shepherd, the man said. Thank you, Decker said. You're not a local, the man said. It was not a question, and it was not unfriendly. I used to be, Decker said. Name's Decker. The man shifted the drip line to his other arm and extended a hand. Norbert Causey, he said. I maintain this garden. Have for 8 years. He glanced at the Voss bed. Gerald put that one in. Good man. His wife is having some trouble, Decker said. Norbert looked at him without expression, which was a kind of expression in itself. I heard something about a letter, he said. Something to do with the house. There's an acquisition notice, Decker said. 60 days. She has a legal aid attorney working it. Norbert set the drip line down on the edge of the bed and was quiet for a moment. How serious is it? He said. Serious, Decker said, but not settled. Norbert looked at the garden and at the empty beds and at the sign with Gerald Voss's name on it. What does she need? He said. Right now? The attorney is the main thing. Community visibility might help. There's a consumer protection angle that's being developed. The more people who know what's happening, the harder it is for a company like this to move quietly. Norbert said, I know the deacon at First Community, and I know the woman who runs the library, and I know pretty much everyone who has a stake in this garden. He picked up the drip line again. Give me 2 days. He gave him 2 days. On the morning of the 3rd day, Decker was back at Garland's when Patrice came to the table with the coffee pot and a look that meant she had information. People are talking, she said. About Helen. About the letter? Norbert Causey came in last night and talked to 4 people in this diner for about an hour, and those 4 people have talked to about 40 people since. She refilled his cup. This is a small town. A company from Spokane trying to take a 73-year-old woman's house 3 months after her husband died is not something this town is going to be quiet about. Good, Decker said. There's going to be a meeting, Patrice said. Sunday at First Community. Helen's daughter is driving up from Portland. The attorney is going to be there. Norbert's organizing it. I'll be there, Decker said. The meeting drew 61 people. Decker counted, not out of habit, but because the number surprised him, and he wanted to verify it. The church hall was full. Folding chairs added to the rows, people standing along the back wall with their coats still on. Helen sat in the front row beside her daughter, a woman named Kathleen who had her mother's clear eyes and a quiet, focused manner that suggested she was listening to everything and recording it for later use. She stood at the front and explained the legal mechanism. She explained what the 60-day notice meant and what the remedies were. She explained that the gap between Meridian's acquisition cost and the property's fair market value created grounds for a challenge under state consumer protection law. She explained that the Attorney General's office had received additional material relevant to the case that she could not discuss in detail, but that had been reviewed and was being taken seriously. Nobody in the room asked who had provided that material. Decker stood at the back by the door with Colt beside him, and he was glad nobody asked. After the meeting, Kathleen Voss came to where he stood. "My mother told me about you," she said. "About the photograph." "I'm sorry I didn't come back sooner," he said. It was all he had, and it was not quite enough, but it was true. Kathleen looked at him steadily, the same pale green eyes as her mother. "She's been keeping that photograph on the wall for 22 years, she said. "Not as a sad thing, as a hopeful one. That's how she is." He did not trust himself to say anything to that, so he said nothing, which was sometimes the right choice. Meridian Property Solutions withdrew the acquisition notice 11 days later. The Attorney General's Consumer Protection Unit had opened a formal inquiry into the company's reverse mortgage acquisition practices in 4 counties. She had filed an emergency injunction based on procedural irregularities in the lender's transfer of the mortgage position to Meridian. Kathleen had engaged a private attorney in Portland who specialized in elder financial protection and who had, within 72 hours of being retained, sent a letter to Meridian's legal department that was, by the attorney's description, very well organized and extremely specific about damages. Decker learned about the withdrawal by text from the attorney at 7:14 in the morning. He was sitting in the Garland's parking lot, engine running, coffee in the cup holder, Colt in the passenger seat with his head on the armrest. He read it twice. He called Helen. She answered on the second ring, which was the same as always. "I heard," she said. "How are you?" he said. A small silence. "Relieved," she said. "And very tired, if I'm honest. It's been a hard few weeks." "It has," he said. "But it's done." "It is," she said. And then, in the same plain, unhurried voice she had used when she took his coffee order, and when she identified his mother's jaw in his face, and when she told him about the cat on the back porch. "Will you come for dinner Saturday? Kathleen is staying until Sunday. She'd like to see you." He sat in the parking lot with the engine running and looked at the bare trees. Some of them had begun to open their buds in the past week. There were early leaves now, pale and tentative, the specific fragile green of very new growth. He looked at Colt. Colt looked back at him, one ear cocked, waiting. "Yes," Decker said. "We'll be there." He had not submitted his resignation from Meridian when he made the decision to stay another week, and then another. He submitted it on a Wednesday morning in a 2-sentence email that he read over once and sent without revising. His supervisor replied with a single line about returning company materials, which he arranged. There was no conversation about why. He did not think there needed to be. He found a room to rent from a retired schoolteacher named Gus Ellerby on the east side of town, a man who kept bees in the backyard and grew a great deal of garlic, and who said, without preamble, when Decker asked about the room, Rent's $400. I need 12 hours notice if you have company. The dog is fine as long as he leaves the chickens alone. Colt left the chickens alone. He was professionally indifferent to chickens. Decker went to dinner at Helen's on Saturday. The table was set for 4, which was Helen and Kathleen and Decker. And at the end of the table, in the place of honor that dogs are not technically supposed to occupy dinner tables, Colt, who sat in great dignity and was given a piece of roast chicken by Helen when she thought no one was looking, though everyone was looking. Kathleen talked about her work in Portland. Helen talked about the garden and what she was going to plant in the spring. Decker talked less than the others, which was usual, but not in a way that made the conversation feel incomplete. After dinner, while Kathleen washed the dishes and Helen and Decker sat on the porch in the cold spring dark, the town quiet around them, Colt at their feet, Helen said, "You could do some good here, you know, with what you know about how those companies work." He had been thinking about that. He had already had 2 conversations with the attorney about working as an informal consultant on reverse mortgage acquisition cases, which were more common in rural eastern Washington than most people realized and were almost never challenged because most people did not know they could be. "I know," he said. "This town needs people who know things," Helen said. "Gerald always said that. He said a community is only as good as the people who decide to stay in it." The cold was settling. A dog barked somewhere down the street. 2 sharp sounds and then silence. The first stars were visible through a break in the cloud cover, a few bright points in the dark. Colt stretched out on the porch boards and put his head on his paws and sighed, which was the sound he made when he had assessed the situation and found it acceptable. "Gerald sounds like someone worth remembering," Decker said. "He was," Helen said. "He would have liked you." Decker looked at the street, the white fence, the same lean in the gatepost, the frost beginning to form again in the hollows of the lawn where the temperature dropped first. He had looked at this fence from the truck and seen an asset to be acquired. He had gotten out of the truck, and it had become something else, a border around a life, a perimeter a good man had maintained for 50 years because it was his, and he loved it. He thought about his mother saying, "Will you keep an eye on him?" standing in the afternoon sun in front of this house, the camera clicking. He thought about Colt walking up those 2 steps without being told. "I'm going to stay for a while," he said. Helen did not say anything. She had expected this, he thought, in the same way she had expected him at the door that first morning, the same patient and clear-eyed certainty she had maintained through all of it. She reached down and put her hand briefly on the top of Colt's head, the same gesture as the first morning, quiet and sure. In the town around them, the last lights were going off in the houses. The cold was clean and still. Somewhere down the block, someone had left a porch lamp on, and it threw a circle of warm yellow light onto the sidewalk below it. Just one light, holding against the dark, the way good things do when they decide to hold. Colt breathed steadily on the porch boards. Decker breathed with him. Home, finally. Or something close enough that the difference no longer seemed to matter. There are people in this world who keep photographs on the wall, not as a record of what was, but as a declaration of what they still believe is possible. They believe that even the ones who left can find their way back. They believe that the places we abandon don't stop belonging to us. They believe that a door, if it remains open long enough, will eventually become the door that matters. If you know someone like that, hold them close. And if you haven't come back yet to the place or the person you left behind, maybe today is the day to at least begin the drive. May you be kept from harm, and may you know, even in the longest winters, that the door is still open. God bless you and yours.